through the courtroom like a grenade, sharp and venomous, delivered with such venom that the air itself seemed to recoil. The defendant, a man in his early 30s with a fitted baseball cap still clutched in one hand, an attitude radiating from every pore, had just committed the unthinkable. He'd just told Judge Judy Hub, 25-year veteran of televised justice, zero-tolerance enforcer of courtroom decorum, the woman who'd made a career out of demolishing disrespect, to shut up. In her own courtroom. On live television, the gallery froze. Not a single person moved. Their collective gasp caught halfway between shock and disbelief, suspended in the charged air like particles before an explosion. A woman in the third row covered her mouth with both hands, eyes wide as saucers. The man beside her sat motionless, his jaw hanging open in a perfect O of astonishment. Even the cameras seemed to pause, their operators momentarily stunned by what they just captured. Bailiff Byrd, stationed at his usual post near the bench, took an instinctive step forward, his professional composure cracking for just a fraction of a second as his eyebrows shot up. His hand moved slightly toward the defendant, not threateningly, but strategically, the automatic response of someone who'd witnessed thousands of courtroom moments and recognized when one had crossed from heated to potentially explosive. The plaintiff, standing at his podium with folders of evidence and text message printouts, stood frozen with his mouth slightly open, his eyes darting between the defendant and Judge Judy, as if watching a car crash unfold in slow motion. This was his case, his money, his vindication, but even he seemed to recognize that something far bigger than his $2,800 loan dispute had just detonated in front of him. And Judge Judy herself? Her face transformed. The stern expression she'd worn throughout the increasingly hostile exchange shifted through a rapid cascade of emotions: surprise, disbelief, fury, and then something that looked almost like satisfaction. Because now, with those two words, the defendant had given her everything she needed. He'd crossed the line so completely, so spectacularly, that what was about to happen was not just justified, it was inevitable. The silence stretched for 3 full seconds. An eternity in courtroom time. The overhead microphones picked up nothing but the soft hiss of the air conditioning system, and the faint rustle of papers as a reporter in the press section shifted nervously. But how did it come to this? What series of terrible decisions, what escalating confrontation, what combination of arrogance and stupidity led a man to stand in Judge Judy's courtroom and tell her to shut up? And more importantly, what happens when you commit courtroom suicide on national television? Stay with me, because what you're about to witness isn't just a case gone wrong, it's a masterclass in consequences. It's what happens when attitude meets authority, when disrespect collides with decades of judicial experience, when someone mistakes a courtroom for a street corner and learns, brutally, publicly, expensively, that respect isn't optional. This is the story of a man who walked into Judge Judy's courtroom with swagger and walked out owing nearly $4,000. This is 13 minutes that destroyed a man's dignity and became courtroom legend. The stage was set in the iconic Judge Judy courtroom, a space burned into the cultural consciousness of millions of viewers across 25 years of syndicated justice. The elevated bench, crafted from dark polished wood and positioned beneath the American flag, that hung as a constant reminder of judicial authority, dominated the space. Judge Judy's high-backed leather chair sat empty, waiting, ominous in its vacancy. 2 wooden podiums faced the bench, separated by several feet of neutral territory, each equipped with a microphone sensitive enough to catch every word, every sigh, every telling pause. The plaintiff's podium sat on the right, the defendant's on the left. Between them, the chasm where truth and lies would battle, where evidence would be weighed, where justice, swift and uncompromising, would be delivered. The gallery stretched 3 rows deep on each side of the center aisle, packed with spectators who'd waited hours outside the studio for the chance to witness justice dispensed in real time. Some were court TV enthusiasts who'd traveled from other states. Others were tourists who'd added a Judge Judy taping to their Los Angeles itinerary, between Disneyland and the Hollywood sign. All of them sat with anticipation crackling through their nervous energy. Phones silenced, cameras forbidden, but memories ready to be made. Studio lights blazed from the overhead rigging, positioned to eliminate every shadow, to make every facial expression readable, every gesture visible. The harsh brightness was intentional. No one could hide under these lights. No lie could survive in this illumination. 4 cameras surrounded the set like electronic sentinels, their red recording lights blinking steadily, lenses trained on the empty podiums, waiting for the drama to unfold. Behind a glass partition, producers reviewed notes, floor managers checked positions, audio technicians monitored levels. This particular case had been flagged during pre-screening as potentially volatile. Something about the defendant's attitude during intake, the way he'd responded to questions, the barely concealed hostility when told to remove his hat for photos. The production team sensed fireworks coming. They had no idea just how right they were. This was Judge Judy's domain, her kingdom. Judith Scheindlin, former Manhattan family court judge, had built an empire on this foundation of no-nonsense adjudication. 25 years, thousands of cases, millions of viewers who tuned in daily to watch her cut through lies with surgical precision, demolish excuses with logic, and deliver verdicts that left no room for appeal or argument. She had rules. Simple rules. Don't lie, she'd catch you. Don't interrupt, she'd shut you down. Don't come unprepared, she'd eviscerate you. Don't waste her time, she'd dismiss your case. And above all, don't, under any circumstances, disrespect the court, the process, or Judge Judy herself. Litigants who understood these rules, who came prepared with evidence and humility, usually received fair treatment. Firm treatment, yes, sometimes harsh treatment, but fair. Judge Judy respected people who took responsibility, who organized their documentation, who answered questions directly without evasion. But those who violated the rules? Those who walked into her courtroom with attitude, who thought charm or aggression could substitute for facts, who believed they could talk their way out of accountability. They became cautionary tales. They became viral video clips. They became examples of exactly what not to do when facing judicial authority. Today's case involved a straightforward debt dispute. Robert Morrison, the plaintiff, had loaned $2,800 to Kyle Chen, the defendant, 6 months ago. Morrison had text messages documenting the loan. He had a signed IOU specifying repayment terms. He had evidence of repeated requests for payment, all ignored. On paper, this should take 5 minutes. Review evidence. Render judgment, next case. But Kyle Chen wasn't interested in making this easy. Kyle Chen stood at the defendant's podium, his fitted baseball cap still perched on his head, despite the multiple signs posted throughout the studio clearly stating no hats in courtroom. His arms crossed over his chest in a posture that broadcast defensiveness before a single word had been exchanged. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, jaw working methodically on a piece of gum that he chewed with deliberate, audible clicks. His outfit, designer sneakers, distressed jeans with strategic rips at the knees, a graphic t-shirt with some logo barely visible beneath a leather jacket, spoke to someone who'd dressed for attitude rather than court. At the plaintiff's podium, Robert Morrison presented a stark contrast. Mid-40s, wearing pressed khakis and a button-down shirt, he stood with his hands resting lightly on his organized folders. 3 manila envelopes sat stacked on his podium surface, each labeled in neat handwriting. Text messages, IOU, original, payment requests. His posture reflected someone who'd prepared thoroughly, who'd done his homework, who understood that evidence and organization mattered in Judge Judy's courtroom. The gallery watched both men with the practiced eye of court TV veterans. They'd learned to read defendants quickly, the ones who came prepared versus the ones who came to fight, the ones who would take responsibility versus the ones who would make excuses. Kyle Chen, with his crossed arms and baseball cap, was clearly falling into the latter category. Several spectators exchanged knowing glances, slight smiles playing at their lips. They sensed entertainment coming. Bailiff Byrd stood at his position near the bench, hands clasped behind his back, his expression professionally neutral but his eyes alert. After decades at Judge Judy's side, he'd developed an almost supernatural ability to assess litigants within seconds of their entrance. The defendant's body language had already triggered his internal warning system. The hat, the gum, the crossed arms, the barely concealed hostility radiating from his posture. Byrd had seen this before. Young men who confused courtrooms with street corners, who thought attitude could substitute for accountability. All rise. Byrd's voice cut through the murmurs, commanding and clear. The gallery rose in unison, their conversations dying mid-sentence. Robert Morrison straightened immediately, his hands moving to his sides in respectful attention. Kyle Chen rose last slowly, with the deliberate slowness of someone making a point, his arms remaining crossed even as he stood. The chamber's door opened. Judge Judy emerged, her black robe flowing behind her with the authority of 25 years and thousands of cases. Her reading glasses hung from a silver chain around her neck, catching the studio lights. She moved with the efficient stride of someone who'd made this entrance so many times it had become muscle memory, yet still commanded attention with every step. Her expression, as always when entering, remained neutral, stern, focused, ready for battle. She ascended the 3 steps to her elevated bench, the height difference symbolic of the power differential in this space. She was elevated for a reason. Justice looked down from on high. She settled into her leather chair, adjusted her robe with practiced movements, and opened the case file before her. Her eyes scanned the first page. Morrison v. Chen, 2800 loan dispute. Text messages as evidence, signed IOU, straightforward on paper. But Judge Judy had learned long ago that straightforward cases often became complicated when human nature, specifically, human pride and stupidity, entered the equation. She looked up, her gaze sweeping across both podiums, taking in the plaintiff's organized folders and pressed appearance, the defendant's casual stance and that baseball cap. Her eyes lingered on the hat for exactly 2 seconds. Long enough for Kyle Chen to notice her noticing, not long enough for him to understand the danger he was in. "Be seated," she said, gesturing with one hand. The courtroom settled back into chairs with a collective rustle. But Judge Judy didn't immediately address the case. Instead, her eyes remained fixed on Kyle Chen, specifically on the fitted cap still sitting atop his head like a flag of disrespect. "Take off your hat," she said, her voice flat, emotionless, stating a fact rather than making a request. Kyle looked up, confused, as if he'd been addressed in a foreign language. "Huh?" The single syllable, that casual, dismissive "huh," landed in the courtroom like a warning shot. Several gallery members' eyes widened. Robert Morrison's shoulders tensed. Bailiff Byrd's head tilted slightly, his alert status upgrading. Judge Judy's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes sharpened. "Your hat. Take it off." "This is a courtroom, not a baseball stadium." Kyle's face registered annoyance rather than embarrassment. He reached up slowly, making a show of his compliance, and removed the cap with exaggerated deliberation. Instead of setting it down respectfully on his podium, he actually tossed it, so it landed with a soft thump against the wooden surface and slid slightly toward the edge. The gallery collectively inhaled. That toss, that casual disregard for the instruction, spoke volumes. Robert Morrison's eyebrows rose. Bailiff Byrd's jaw tightened fractionally. Judge Judy watched the hat slide to a stop. She didn't comment on the attitude behind the gesture, but her silence somehow communicated more than words could. She let the moment hang there, let Kyle Chen sit in his own disrespect, before returning her attention to the case file. "Mr. Morrison," she said, her voice returning to its normal courtroom cadence, "this is your case. Tell me what happened." Robert Morrison cleared his throat, grateful for the invitation to speak, to establish his credibility before the defendant could poison the well further. "Yes, Your Honor, thank you. 6 months ago, the defendant asked to borrow money. He said he needed it for car repairs and rent. He was my friend at the time. We'd known each other for about 2 years through mutual acquaintances." Judge Judy nodded, making a note. "How much did you loan him?" $2,800, Your Honor. I transferred it to him via Venmo in 3 installments over the course of a week. "Do you have documentation of these transfers?" "Yes, Your Honor." Morrison opened his first folder, producing printed screenshots of Venmo transactions, each showing the date, amount, and the defendant's name. He passed them to Bailiff Byrd, who carried them to Judge Judy's bench. She studied the printouts, her eyes scanning the details with practiced efficiency. "And did he sign anything promising to repay you?" "Yes, Your Honor. After the 3rd transfer, I asked him to sign an IOU specifying the repayment terms. He agreed to pay me back in full within 90 days. Morrison produced a single sheet of paper, handled carefully, clearly the original document. "This is the IOU he signed." Judge Judy accepted it from Bailiff Byrd, examining the handwriting, the signature, the date. Her expression remained neutral, but anyone familiar with her could see the case building in her mind, pieces clicking into place. 90 days, she repeated. "And today is 6 months since the loan, Your Honor. 183 days to be exact." Judge Judy set down the IOU, her eyes shifting to Kyle Chen for the first time since the hat incident. He stood at his podium, arms crossed again, his jaw still working that piece of gum with rhythmic, audible clicks that echoed in the suddenly quiet courtroom. "So," Judge Judy said, her voice taking on that edge her regular viewers recognized as the beginning of a takedown, "did you borrow this money?" Kyle shrugged, the gesture casual, dismissive. "Yeah, I borrowed it." The chewing continued. Click, click, click. Judge Judy's eyes narrowed fractionally. "Are you chewing gum in my courtroom?" Kyle's jaw stopped mid-chew, the gum suddenly visible between his teeth as his mouth hung slightly open. He looked genuinely confused, as if the question itself made no sense. "Yeah, I'm chewing gum, so?" The "so" hung in the air like a challenge. The gallery gasped, not loud but audible enough. A collective intake of breath that signaled everyone recognized the magnitude of what had just happened. This wasn't ignorance. This was defiance. The woman in the 3rd row who'd covered her mouth earlier now gripped her companion's arm. A man in the back row shook his head slowly, already anticipating the destruction to come. Judge Judy set down her pen with deliberate care, the small motion somehow more ominous than if she'd slammed it down. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to that deadly quiet tone that regular viewers knew meant someone was about to get obliterated. Spit it out. Now. Kyle's face registered annoyance rather than contrition. He made a show of rolling his eyes. Actually rolled his eyes at Judge Judy. Before reaching up to his mouth with 2 fingers, extracting the gum with exaggerated slowness. Instead of asking for a tissue or looking for a trash can, he held the gum between his fingers for a moment as if deciding what to do with it, before finally shoving it into his jeans pocket. Robert Morrison at the plaintiff's podium stood motionless, his eyes wide, watching this train wreck unfold with the horrified fascination of someone witnessing a car accident in slow motion. This was his case, his money, his vindication. But even he seemed to understand that something far more significant than a debt dispute was unfolding before him. Judge Judy's expression remained controlled, but her eyes had taken on that laser-focus intensity that her staff recognized as the pre-detonation warning. She didn't address the eye roll, didn't comment on the attitude behind the gum disposal. Instead, she returned to the case, her voice resuming its normal courtroom cadence, though everyone in the room could feel the tension coiling tighter beneath the surface. "Do you owe Mr. Morrison $2,800? Kyle shifted his weight, arms crossing back over his chest. "I mean, technically, but it's a yes or no question. Do you owe him the money?" "Yeah, but he's got money. He doesn't need it." The words landed like stones in still water, ripples of reaction spreading through the gallery. Several spectators' eyebrows shot up. One woman actually said "oh no" under her breath, loud enough for the microphones to catch. Judge Judy's hands folded together on the bench, her fingers interlacing with precision. "Whether he needs the money is irrelevant to whether you owe the money. Did you sign this IOU?" She held up the document Morrison had provided, the handwritten agreement with Kyle's signature clearly visible at the bottom. Kyle glanced at it, his jaw tightening. "Yeah, I signed it, but..." "No but. Did you or did you not sign a legal document promising to repay this loan within 90 days? "I did, but... And has it been 90 days? "Yeah, but if you'd just let me explain." "I don't need you to explain." Judge Judy's voice climbed slightly, the first crack in her controlled demeanor. "The facts explain themselves. You borrowed money. You signed a document promising to repay it. You haven't paid it back. What else is there to explain?" Kyle's face flushed red, frustration overtaking whatever minimal sense of self-preservation he might have possessed. "Maybe if you'd actually listen instead of interrupting me." The gallery erupted in louder gasps. This time the sound was sharp, shocked, almost frightened. Several people leaned forward in their seats. The man in the back row covered his face with one hand. The woman beside him whispered urgently to her companion. Even the camera operators seemed to shift their positions slightly, sensing they were capturing something extraordinary. Bailiff Byrd took a subtle step closer to the defendant's podium. His hands still clasped behind his back, but his posture more alert, more ready. His eyes remained fixed on Kyle Chen, tracking every movement, every gesture, calculating threat levels with decades of experience. Judge Judy's hands unfolded slowly, her palms pressing flat against the bench surface. When she spoke, her voice was quiet again, but it carried the weight of absolute authority, of warning, of a line being drawn in permanent ink. "Let me make something very clear to you, Mr. Chen. You are in my courtroom. You borrowed money you haven't paid back, and now you're standing here with an attitude like you're the victim. I suggest you check yourself, and quickly, or this is going to get much, much worse for you." Kyle's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time since entering the courtroom, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. The red flush of anger drained slightly, replaced by something that might have been the beginning of awareness, but his pride, his ego, his need to save face refused to let him back down completely. "Whatever," he muttered, the word barely audible but caught perfectly by the sensitive microphone at his podium. Judge Judy's head snapped up, her eyes locking onto him with the intensity of a predator spotting prey. "Excuse me? What did you just say?" The courtroom held its collective breath. Kyle seemed to realize he'd been heard, that the microphone had betrayed his attempt at face-saving defiance. He looked down at his podium, at his hands, at anything except Judge Judy's face. "Nothing. I didn't say anything. You said whatever. I heard you. The microphone heard you. Everyone in this courtroom heard you." Judge Judy's voice was cold, factual, building a case with each word. "You've chewed gum in my court. You've interrupted me. You've argued about facts that aren't in dispute, and now you're muttering disrespectful comments under your breath. Do you understand how badly this is going for you right now?" Kyle's jaw clenched, his hands gripping the edges of the podium. His knuckles whitened with the pressure. The gallery watched in rapt silence, sensing they were witnessing the build-up to something spectacular, something that would be replayed and shared and discussed for years to come. Robert Morrison stood at his podium with his folders of evidence. Suddenly almost forgotten in the drama unfolding across the aisle, his case had become secondary to the confrontation between judicial authority and stubborn arrogance. But he didn't seem to mind. Justice was being served in ways he'd never anticipated. Judge Judy picked up the IOU again, studying it as if seeing it for the first time, though everyone knew she'd already memorized every detail. The silence stretched, elastic and heavy, filling the courtroom with anticipation. Okay, if you're already sensing this is about to go completely off the rails, do me a favor right now, hit that subscribe button. We break down the most insane Judge Judy moments every single week and what's about to happen next. It's legendary. This guy is seconds away from making the biggest mistake of his life. Subscribe so you never miss moments like this, trust me. You'll want to see how this ends. Judge Judy returned her attention to the evidence before her. The IOU document positioned prominently at the center of her workspace. She tapped it once with her index finger. The gesture deliberate, calling attention back to the facts, to the undeniable reality that Kyle Chen seemed determined to ignore. This document says you would repay the full amount within 90 days. It's been 6 months. Where's the money? Kyle's shoulders tensed, his defensive posture hardening. Look, I've had expenses. Everyone has expenses, Judge Judy interrupted, her voice sharp. That's not an answer to my question. Where is the money? My car broke down 2 months after I borrowed it. I had to get it fixed. That cost me like $1,500. Did you have $1,500 to fix your car? Kyle hesitated, sensing a trap but unable to see where it lay. Yeah, I had the money, but I needed my car for work. So you had money. You just chose not to pay him back. Judge Judy's statement landed with the finality of a closing door. You prioritized your car over your legal obligation to repay a debt. That's called making a choice, Mr. Chen. And choices have consequences. Kyle's face flushed deeper red, his jaw clenching visibly. It's not that simple. You don't understand. My car is how I get to work, and if I can't work, I can't make money. And Mr. Morrison's money? Did that just evaporate? Did it cease to exist because you decided your priorities were more important than your promises? Judge Judy leaned forward, her voice climbing. You signed a legal document. That makes it a legal obligation. Not a suggestion. Not a favor you can repay when convenient. An obligation, the gallery murmured, heads nodding in agreement. Several spectators shifted in their seats, fully invested now, watching Kyle dig himself deeper with each word. Robert Morrison remained still at his podium, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes sharp, tracking every exchange, watching his former friend unravel under judicial scrutiny. Kyle's hands gripped the podium edge, knuckles whitening. You're twisting everything I'm saying. You're not letting me explain. I don't need you to explain. Judge Judy's voice rose sharply, cutting through his protest like a knife. The facts explain themselves. You borrowed money. You signed a document promising to repay it. You had money for other things but chose not to repay your debt. Those are facts, Mr. Chen. They don't need your interpretation or your excuses. Kyle's breathing quickened, his chest rising and falling with increasing agitation. His face had gone from flush to nearly purple, anger overwhelming whatever minimal judgment he'd possessed when entering the courtroom. Yeah, but if you'd just listen to what I'm trying to say. I am listening. You're just not saying anything worth hearing. The words landed with devastating precision, each syllable a small detonation. All I'm hearing are excuses. Excuses about your car. Excuses about expenses. Excuses about priorities. What I'm not hearing is accountability. What I'm not hearing is, I owe the money, I should have paid it back, I made a mistake. Do you know why I'm not hearing that, Mr. Chen? Kyle stared at her, his mouth pressed into a tight line, his entire body radiating hostility. Because you don't believe you did anything wrong, Judge Judy continued, her voice taking on that professorial tone she used when delivering lessons. You think because you had other expenses, because you needed your car, because you decided your priorities were more important, you think that absolves you of your obligation. It doesn't, it never has, it never will. This is bullshit. The profanity exploded from Kyle's mouth before he could stop it, the word echoing through the courtroom like a gunshot. The gallery erupted. Gasps, sharp and shocked, rippled through the seats. Several spectators' hands flew to their mouths. The woman in the third row who'd been reacting throughout now gripped her companion's arm hard enough to leave marks. A man near the back stood halfway out of his seat before remembering where he was and sitting back down. Bailiff Byrd moved immediately, taking 2 full steps closer to Kyle's podium, his hands coming to his sides, ready to intervene if necessary. His expression remained professional, but his body language screamed warning. He'd seen cases escalate from verbal to physical before, and his job was to ensure Judge Judy's safety above all else. Judge Judy's face transformed from stern to absolutely thunderous. She rose slightly from her chair, not standing fully but elevating enough to emphasize her authority, her physical position matching the power she wielded. Her voice, when it came, was loud enough to fill every corner of the courtroom but controlled enough to demonstrate she was still in complete command. Watch your mouth in my courtroom. Kyle's hands flew up in a gesture of frustration, his voice rising to match hers. Why, you're not listening anyway. You made up your mind before I even walked in here. This whole thing is rigged. The accusations tumbled out in a rush, each one more damaging than the last. The gallery sat frozen, unable to look away from the spectacle. This had transcended a debt dispute. This had become something far more primal, a battle of wills between judicial authority and uncontrolled arrogance. Robert Morrison stood at his podium with his eyes wide, his carefully organized folders forgotten. His case had disappeared into the background, overshadowed completely by Kyle's self-destruction. But he didn't look disappointed. If anything, his expression showed something approaching satisfaction. This was vindication beyond anything a simple judgment could provide. Judge Judy's hands pressed flat on her bench, her body leaning forward, her voice dropping back to that deadly quiet that was somehow more terrifying than shouting. You think this is rigged? You think I've made up my mind unfairly? Let me tell you what I think, Mr. Chen. I think you're a man who doesn't believe rules apply to him. I think you're someone who's never been held accountable for anything in his entire life. And I think you're about to learn a very expensive lesson about respect. Kyle's breathing came in short, sharp bursts, his face contorted with rage, with frustration, with the cognitive dissonance of someone who genuinely believed he was right confronting a reality that disagreed. His fingers drummed against the podium surface, an unconscious gesture that broadcast his agitation to everyone watching. You're just like everyone else, he said, his voice shaking with anger. You don't care about the truth. You just want to make yourself look good on TV. The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Judge Judy's expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession. Surprise that he'd go there, fury at the accusation, and then something that looked almost like anticipation. Because Kyle Chen had just given her everything she needed. He'd attacked her integrity. He'd questioned her motives. He'd crossed every possible line, and now she could destroy him completely. The truth? Judge Judy's voice climbed steadily. The truth is you're a deadbeat who borrowed money he had no intention of repaying. The truth is you've come into my courtroom with nothing but attitude and excuses. The truth is, oh, just shut up already. The words erupted from Kyle's mouth like lava, loud and venomous and absolute. The courtroom froze completely. Time seemed to stop. The overhead lights suddenly felt hotter. The air felt thinner. Every person in that space knew with absolute certainty that they'd just witnessed something extraordinary. Something catastrophic. Something that would define this moment for years to come. Kyle Chen had just told Judge Judy to shut up. The silence that followed was absolute. Not the silence of a pause in conversation, but the silence of a world holding its breath. The silence of inevitability, of recognition, of understanding that something irreversible had just occurred. The overhead air conditioning system hummed softly, suddenly the loudest sound in the entire courtroom. A woman's watch ticked audibly in the third row. Someone's stomach gurgled nervously in the back. These tiny, mundane sounds filled the vacuum left by Kyle Chen's catastrophic words. Oh, just shut up already. The phrase echoed in memory if not in actual sound, replaying in every mind present. The gallery sat frozen, faces locked in expressions of shock that would have been comical in any other context. Mouths hung open, eyes stretched wide. Hands gripped armrests or companion sleeves. Several people had stopped breathing entirely, their bodies locked in the paralysis of witnessing something they couldn't quite believe had actually happened. Judge Judy remained exactly as she'd been mid-sentence, leaning forward slightly, her mouth still shaped around the word she'd been speaking when Kyle interrupted her. No, not interrupted, attacked her with those two words. Her expression cycled through emotions so rapidly they were almost subliminal. Shock, disbelief, rage. And then, settling like dust after an explosion, something that looked remarkably like satisfaction. Because now, she had everything she needed. Bailiff Byrd had moved another full step closer to Kyle's podium, his hand actually rising slightly toward the defendant, not touching him but positioned strategically between Kyle and the judge. His face, usually a mask of professional neutrality, showed genuine concern. In all his years at Judge Judy's side, he'd witnessed countless moments of disrespect. But this, telling a sitting judge to shut up during active proceedings, this entered territory he'd rarely seen crossed. Robert Morrison at the plaintiff's podium stood with his mouth forming a perfect O of astonishment, his folders completely forgotten, his organized evidence suddenly irrelevant. His case about a $2,800 loan had just become backdrop to something far more significant. He watched Kyle Chen the way one watches a building collapse, with horror, fascination, and the knowledge that what's falling can never be rebuilt. Kyle himself seemed to be experiencing a delayed realization of what he'd just done. The red flush of anger that had consumed his face began draining away, replaced by a pale grayish tone that spoke to genuine fear finally penetrating his armor of arrogance. His hands, which had been gripping the podium in rage, now gripped it for support. His eyes, which had been narrowed in fury, now widened with dawning comprehension. The cameras captured everything, every angle, every expression, every microsecond of this moment that would be replayed, shared, analyzed, and discussed for years to come. The red recording lights blinked steadily, electronic witnesses to courtroom catastrophe. 3 full seconds passed. An eternity, a lifetime, a chasm of silence that grew heavier with each passing moment. Judge Judy's hands, which had been pressed flat against her bench, slowly curled into loose fists. Not threatening fists, not aggressive fists, but the fists of someone exercising enormous control to maintain composure. When she finally spoke, her voice emerged quiet, calm, almost conversational, which made it infinitely more terrifying than if she'd been shouting. "What did you just say to me?" The question hung in the air. Not really a question at all, but a prompt, a setup, a trap closing around Kyle's throat. She knew exactly what he'd said. Everyone knew exactly what he'd said. The microphones had captured every syllable, but she was giving him the chance to repeat it, to confirm it, to seal his own fate with his own words. Kyle's mouth opened, then closed. His throat worked as he swallowed hard. The color continued draining from his face until he looked almost gray under the harsh studio lights. His eyes darted around the courtroom, to the gallery, to Robert Morrison, to Bailiff Byrd, anywhere except Judge Judy's face, looking for escape. For help, for some way out of the hole he'd just dug. I didn't, he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. All the earlier aggression evaporated like water on hot pavement. "You didn't what?" Judge Judy's voice remained quiet, controlled, deadly. "You didn't tell me to shut up?" "Because I heard you. The bailiff heard you. Mr. Morrison heard you. Every single person in this courtroom heard you. And more importantly," she gestured slightly toward the cameras, "those microphones heard you. So let me ask you again very clearly. What did you just say to me?" Kyle's hands were trembling now, visibly shaking against the podium surface. His breath came in short, shallow gasps. The fight-or-flight response had fully engaged, and since flight wasn't an option, his body seemed to be shutting down entirely. I said. He paused, unable to force the words out, knowing that repeating them would be like signing his own death warrant. "Say it," Judge Judy commanded, her voice still quiet but carrying absolute authority. "I want to hear you say it again. Tell this courtroom exactly what you said to me." The gallery leaned forward collectively, drawn by the gravitational pull of this moment, every eye fixed on Kyle Chen, watching him squirm, watching him realize the magnitude of his mistake, watching him understand that there was no escape. No backtrack, no way to undo what he'd done. Kyle's voice, when it finally emerged, was broken, defeated, barely audible. "I told you to. Shut up." Judge Judy nodded slowly as if he'd just confirmed a mathematical equation. "You told me to shut up. In my courtroom. During official proceedings. Is that correct?" "Yes." The word came out as barely more than a breath. "I need you to speak up, Mr. Chen. For the record, for these cameras, for everyone watching, did you or did you not tell a sitting judge to shut up?" Kyle's shoulders slumped in complete defeat. His voice louder now but hollow, empty of everything except resignation. "Yes, Your Honor, I did." Judge Judy leaned back in her chair, the motion deliberate, theatrical even, creating physical and psychological distance. She removed her reading glasses from her face, folded them with precise movements, and set them on the bench. Each action measured, controlled, building anticipation for what everyone in the courtroom knew was coming. The gallery held its collective breath. Bailiff Byrd remained positioned strategically, ready for any possibility. Robert Morrison watched with something approaching awe, witnessing justice about to be delivered on a scale that transcended his simple debt case. Judge Judy's hands folded together on her bench, her fingers interlacing with precision. Her eyes, when they locked onto Kyle Chen's face, held no mercy, no sympathy, no possibility of leniency. He'd crossed the line completely, spectacularly, and now he would learn what happened when you disrespected judicial authority on national television. "In 25 years on this bench," she began, her voice taking on that lecturing tone that signaled a complete takedown was coming, "I have dealt with thousands of people, liars, cheaters, thieves, frauds. I've seen every kind of behavior, every excuse, every attempt to avoid accountability. But you, Mr. Chen." She paused, letting the silence stretch again, letting the weight of his mistake press down on him. "You are something truly special." The words dripped with sarcasm so thick it was almost tangible. "You walked into my courtroom," Judge Judy continued, her voice steady, measured, each word a carefully placed stone building, toward an inevitable conclusion, with an attitude that told me everything I needed to know about you before you even opened your mouth. Kyle stood at his podium, shoulders hunched, head down, all traces of his earlier defiance completely obliterated. His hands no longer gripped the podium in anger, but clutched it for support as if his legs might give out at any moment. The transformation from cocky to crushed was total, absolute, devastating to witness. You wore a hat in court, a direct sign of disrespect. You chewed gum during proceedings, showing you view this courtroom as casual entertainment rather than a legal forum. You interrupted me repeatedly, as if your voice carried more weight than judicial authority. Judge Judy's voice climbed slightly with each accusation, building momentum like a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. The gallery hung on every word, spectators leaning forward in their seats, phones forgotten, completely absorbed in watching justice dispense itself with surgical precision. Several people nodded along with each point, their own experiences with disrespectful people finding validation in Judge Judy's systematic dismantling. You used profanity. You accused me of bias. You claimed this proceeding was rigged. Each statement landed like a hammer blow. And then, you told me to shut up. Bailiff Byrd remained positioned near Kyle's podium, his presence a silent reminder that this situation could still escalate, that physical removal might become necessary if the defendant didn't maintain whatever minimal composure he had left. Robert Morrison watched from his podium with an expression mixing satisfaction, vindication, and something approaching pity. This had gone so far beyond his $2,800 that the money almost seemed irrelevant now. He was witnessing something larger, a case study in consequences, a master class in what happens when pride collides with power. Judge Judy picked up her pen, the simple motion drawing every eye in the courtroom. Let me tell you what's going to happen now, Mr. Chen. Judgment for the plaintiff in the full amount of $2,800. Kyle's body sagged slightly with what might have been relief. At least it was over. At least he could leave, could put this nightmare behind him, could, plus interest at 9% annually from the date of the loan. His head snapped up. Judge Judy was consulting papers calculating with swift efficiency. That's 6 months at 9% on $2,800, which comes to $126 in interest. Your total is now $2,926. Kyle's face, which had started to regain some color, paled again. But Judge Judy wasn't finished. She set down her pen, folded her hands on the bench, and delivered the next blow. Plus court costs. Mr. Morrison paid a filing fee to bring this case. You're going to reimburse him. That's $250. That brings your total to $3,176. The number hung in the air, significantly higher than the original loan amount. Kyle's mouth opened slightly, but no sound emerged. He'd lost not just the case but hundreds of dollars more in penalties and costs. But Judge Judy still wasn't finished. She leaned forward, her expression shifting from stern to something approaching satisfaction. The look of someone about to deliver a lesson that would never be forgotten. However, we're not done yet, Mr. Chen. The 4 words sent ice through the courtroom. If she wasn't done, what else could there possibly be? The gallery exchanged confused glances. Robert Morrison's eyebrows rose. Even Bailiff Byrd seemed to react with slight surprise, his head tilting fractionally. Judge Judy's voice dropped to that deadly quiet again, the volume that demanded absolute attention. For your behavior in my courtroom today, the hat, the gum, the interruptions, the profanity, the accusations, and especially for telling me to shut up, I am holding you in contempt of court. The gallery erupted in gasps, louder and more unified than any previous reaction. Contempt charges in Judge Judy's courtroom were extraordinarily rare, reserved for only the most egregious violations of courtroom decorum. Several spectators actually stood slightly in their seats before remembering themselves and sitting back down. The woman in the 3rd row grabbed her companion's arm so hard he winced. Kyle's face drained of all remaining color, leaving him gray, almost green under the harsh lights. His knees actually buckled slightly, forcing him to grip the podium harder to stay upright. Contempt of court carries a fine of $500, payable immediately to the court, not to Mr. Morrison. Judge Judy's voice remained steady, clinical, delivering the sentence like a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis. Your total obligation is now $3,676. You came in here owing $2,800. Your attitude, your disrespect, your complete inability to control yourself just cost you an additional $876. Kyle's mouth worked soundlessly, trying to form words that wouldn't come. His entire body trembled visibly. The financial impact was devastating. But more than that, the public humiliation, the complete and utter destruction of his dignity on national television, that was the real price he'd pay. Judge Judy picked up her gavel, the wooden hammer that would seal his fate with one final, definitive sound. But before I dismiss this case, Judge Judy said, her hand resting on the gavel but not yet raising it, I want to make sure you understand something. Mr. Chen, Kyle looked up, his eyes red-rimmed, his face a mask of misery and dawning comprehension. Every muscle in his body screamed defeat. You walked in here thinking you were tough, thinking you could intimidate your way out of responsibility, thinking that attitude and aggression could substitute for facts and accountability. Her voice remained steady, professorial, delivering a lesson to Kyle but also to everyone watching. You were wrong on every count. The gallery sat in absolute silence, absorbing every word, understanding they were witnessing not just a verdict but an education. Respect isn't something you give when you feel like it. It's not optional.